A police officer was left bleeding in a dark alley. His K-9 partner chased the only clue into the shadows. But what Bear uncovered beneath the city stunned the entire force. What were they planning? And how far did it go? Here's the full story. But before we jump in, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments and tap that subscribe button. Trust me, what happens next is something you'll want to see with your own eyes. The alley smelled of damp cement, stale grease, and something else, something metallic that clung to the rain-slicked pavement in crimson smears. A few blocks away, city lights flickered against the low-hanging clouds, but here, tucked between the back end of a shuttered bar and an abandoned print shop, the world had gone still. Officer Marcus Hale lay on his side, half conscious and bleeding steadily from a wound just below his ribs. His breath came in short, shuddering bursts, clouding in the frigid night air. One hand was pressed uselessly against the wound, slick with blood, while the other reached feebly for the radio clipped to his shoulder. The signal never made it out. His K-9 partner, Bear, a massive Belgian Malinois with soot-colored fur and amber eyes, stood watch a few feet away. The dog was rigid, still as a statue, except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. His ears were pinned forward, eyes darting between the darkness and Marcus, every muscle in his frame drawn tight. It had started like any other patrol. Routine, quiet, too quiet. They had been cruising through East Garden, a district riddled with boarded-up buildings, quiet meth labs, and too many blind alleys for trouble to disappear into. Then came a suspicious report from a local food truck operator. Strange movements behind the old paper mill, flashlights, crouched figures. Marcus called it in. Dispatch confirmed a previous break-in attempt 2 weeks ago. He was told to approach with caution. Backup would be delayed. He and Bear stepped out together. Marcus remembered passing the alley on foot, his flashlight barely cutting through the mist. A rusted gate creaked nearby. Bear had stopped suddenly, his nose twitching toward the shadows. Then a sound, a scrape, a breath held too long. Then the shot. Pain bloomed in his side like liquid fire. He staggered, fell against the brick, and slid down to the cold ground. Bear had lunged forward at once, barking so ferociously that the air itself seemed to crack. A figure darted past, too fast for Marcus to identify. Another shape disappeared deeper into the alley, and now here they were. Marcus motionless on the wet asphalt, Bear crouched over him like a sentinel. Time dragged. Every minute was louder than the last. The ticking rain, the faint buzz of distant neon, the subtle rasp of Marcus trying to breathe through clenched teeth. Bear moved closer, his large frame pressing gently against Marcus's leg. He licked the officer's bloodied hand as if to keep him awake. The connection between them ran deeper than most people could understand. 3 years of training, missions, long shifts, and shared silence. Bear knew every nuance of Marcus's body, every shift in his tone, every tremble in his breath, and now something was wrong, very wrong. Bear stepped back and faced the alley again, lowering his head close to the ground. His nose twitched once, twice. He paced slowly forward, body low, silent. There were 2 trails now, one headed back toward the street, soaked in panic and sweat. The other veered deeper into the alley behind the bar's rear lot, where the puddles ran dark with motor oil. Bear hesitated only for a moment. Then he bolted. He vanished into the darkness with purpose, every paw landing soundlessly despite his size. His senses lit up, the scent of blood, the sharp tang of gunpowder, the lingering trace of adrenaline and fear. He passed rusted dumpsters and loose chains swaying from a fence post, then came to an abrupt stop. There, a faint scuff mark on the concrete, a partial shoe print, fresh. Bear pivoted and followed it, weaving between trash bins and broken crates. The city around them carried on obliviously, traffic lights changing, clubs thumping, a far-off ambulance whining in another neighborhood. But here in the alley, something had been left behind, something important. A strange scent pulled Bear to the left, not the shooter, but something else. Paper, chemicals, a mix he recognized from their time training at the narcotics warehouse. Adhesive, ink, solvents. Bear followed it to the back of the print shop. The scent was stronger here, almost overwhelming. The door was locked, but a panel had been pried open near the ground, a crawl space barely wide enough for a person. Inside, Bear could see faint glimmers of light. He barked once sharply, a signal. Then he turned back. Bear bounded through the alley, his breathing steady, purpose sharpened to a single point. Get help, then return. When he reached Marcus, the officer's eyes were still fluttering open and closed. His skin was pale, his shirt soaked through with blood. Bear barked again, shorter this time, urgent. He stepped over Marcus, gently nudging his head. When there was no response, Bear moved toward the sidewalk. The streets were nearly empty, but not completely. A late-night dog walker across the avenue paused when Bear bounded across the road. The woman stared at the blood on his fur, the urgency in his stride. She hesitated, then followed, unsure. Bear led her all the way back to the alley's edge. The moment she saw Marcus lying there, she screamed. That was all it took. Within minutes, red and blue lights lit the mouth of the alley. EMTs swarmed the scene. Officers drew their weapons, scanning the perimeter. Bear did not leave Marcus's side. Even as paramedics worked to slow the bleeding, Bear stood protectively near his partner, his eyes locked on the rear exit of the alley. Officer Langston knelt beside him, placing a hand on Bear's shoulder. "Easy, boy. We got him now." But Bear didn't flinch. His posture told a different story. This wasn't over. Langston caught the look in the dog's eyes and stood quickly. Something still out there. As Marcus was loaded into the ambulance, Bear paced in tight circles. His instincts screamed for action. Langston called out to the others, ordering a sweep of the rear alley and adjacent buildings. That's when Bear bolted again. He dashed back to the print shop, this time with Langston close behind. Bear led them straight to the crawl space behind the building. Langston knelt, flashing his light inside. Empty, dust, broken shelving. Then, at the far end, a black case, long, sealed with reinforced latches. Bear growled softly. Langston called it in. Within 20 minutes, bomb squad officers were carefully extracting the case from the crawl space. They laid it open on the sidewalk, rain pattering on its surface. Inside, bundles of high-grade thermite, timers, and blueprints. One blueprint showed a metro station under construction. Another showed the ventilation systems for a federal courthouse 2 miles away. The officers stared in silence. Bear paced once, then sat beside the case, eyes fixed on the street, as if waiting for the next move. At the hospital, Marcus Hale lay unconscious but stable. Tubes ran from his arm, monitors blinked quietly above his head. Nurses moved with practiced grace around the room. The attending physician made notes, then turned to the officer standing guard outside. "He's lucky. Another 10 minutes and we'd be having a different conversation." Back at the station, Captain Reyes looked over the bomb case, the blueprints, and the photos from the alley. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the table. This was never just a break-in. Langston nodded. Bear found that case. No hesitation. He went right to it. Reyes glanced at the K-9 sitting silently in the hallway, his fur still damp, his eyes steady. "We need to dig into this fast." Langston leaned in. "Mom, whatever this is, it isn't over, and Bear knows it." That night, while most of the city slept through the storm, a police dog named Bear waited outside the hospital doors, unmoving, watching, guarding. Somewhere in the dark, others were already preparing to finish what the shooter in the alley had started, and Bear, the only one who had seen the trail, would be the key to stopping them. Rain had slowed to a whisper by morning, but the alley where Marcus fell was still cordoned off. Plastic barriers reflecting flashing lights, muddy footprints stamped across the ground, and an air of unresolved tension that clung to the buildings like mist. Bear sat near the entrance to the alley, unmoving, his eyes fixed on the crawl space behind the print shop. Officers came and went, their conversations clipped and urgent, but Bear stayed where he was, watchful, still tracking something only he could sense. Back at the station, Captain Reyes stood before a wall covered in evidence. Photos, blueprints, maps with pinheads pressed into city zones, all circling a pattern too complex to be coincidence. Next to her stood Officer Langston holding a report just delivered from forensics. "No prints," Langston said. Whoever packed the case knew what they were doing. Reyes nodded slowly. The blueprints matched 3 different sites, all under municipal construction contracts. Each location has access to ventilation, crowd control systems, or long tunnel corridors. "Terrorism?" Langston asked. Reyes did not answer. She simply turned to the photograph of Bear seated beside the case of thermite. "He found it before any of us even knew what we were looking for." Langston glanced toward the hallway. "We should take him back to the source. If he still has the scent, he might lead us to wherever this started." They returned to East Garden in an unmarked vehicle. Bear in the back seat, alert, ears twitching at every passing siren and voice. When they arrived, the alley had already begun to feel like a ghost scene. Taped off, evidence collected, photographs taken, but no answers. Langston knelt and unclipped Bear's harness. "You know what to do, boy." Bear did not hesitate. He moved with precision, nose low to the ground, retracing his steps from the night before. He passed the bloodstains, paused momentarily where Marcus had fallen, then continued through the broken gate behind the bar. At the print shop, he stopped and sniffed the crawl space again. But this time he turned sharply to the left, pulling toward a narrow side path between buildings most officers had ignored. Langston followed without question. The path was barely a corridor. High brick walls on either side, moss growing in the cracks, damp cardboard stacked against a rusted delivery door. Bear paused at the door, sniffed once, then barked sharply. Langston pushed the door open and found what appeared to be a service corridor, pipes lining the ceiling, a floor covered in grime and litter, but something else too, a ladder leading downward. Langston radioed it in, then looked down into the dark shaft. "You sure about this?" Bear growled low, not at him, but at something below. They descended slowly, first Langston, then Bear, careful on the metal rungs. The space beneath was old, long abandoned infrastructure buried under decades of modern development. Old steam tunnels, probably, with arched ceilings and rusted valves. Bear's breathing was steady, every movement deliberate. The scent was stronger here. They moved in silence, Langston's flashlight cutting a narrow cone of light ahead. Pipes hissed quietly in the distance, and water dripped rhythmically from the ceiling. At one junction, Bear stopped suddenly and tilted his head toward the right-hand tunnel. The scent trail had split. Langston knelt, watching Bear carefully. The dog sniffed both paths, then turned left, his muscles tightening. They followed that path for nearly 10 minutes, passing graffiti-tagged walls and discarded gloves, until Bear stopped again, this time at a metal panel that had been pried loose and then shoved back into place unevenly. Bear pawed at the edge. Langston drew his weapon and signaled Bear to hold back. He pulled the panel open. Behind it, a crude storage space had been carved into the concrete recess. Dark, but not empty. There were crates, sealed tightly. Langston stepped forward, opened one with his knife, and froze. Inside were uniforms, police jackets, city contractor vests, and ID tags, all counterfeit. Another crate held security key cards. Langston exhaled, his voice barely a whisper. They were planning to blend in. Bear remained still, his ears twitching toward a sound in the distance. A low scrape. A breath exhaled too sharply. Someone else was down here. Langston backed away, reaching for his radio, but Bear had already turned. He was moving, fast and silent, back down the tunnel, his nose leading again. Langston followed, radioing back up as he went. We have evidence of coordinated infiltration. Multiple sites. Someone is moving through these tunnels now. Bear picked up speed. The tunnel dipped downward slightly, then opened into a larger corridor where concrete met stone. The scent was unmistakable now. It was fresh. They had just missed someone. Bear stopped near a pile of debris and sniffed a discarded flashlight, still warm to the touch. Langston reached for his phone and took photos of the area, then followed Bear again as he veered right. This path led to a ladder rising toward a maintenance hatch. Bear jumped up, placing both front paws on the rungs. Langston followed, pushing the hatch open carefully. They emerged in the rear yard of the city logistics depot, a hub used by municipal vehicles and supply contractors. It was bordered by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and only a few maintenance trucks were parked nearby. But there was a problem. One truck was running, its headlights off, engine idling. Langston motioned for Bear to stay low as he radioed in the location. He edged forward, flashlight off, using the side of a parked vehicle as cover. Bear moved parallel, invisible in the shadows. Inside the truck, two figures sat. One passed a tablet to the other, pointing to a map on the screen. Then the passenger stepped out. A man in a city works vest, pushing a dolly toward the back of the vehicle. On the dolly, two identical crates to the one Bear had found the night before. Langston's hand tightened around his weapon. The man opened the rear door. Bear burst into action. His stride was perfect, straight, fast, low. He surged across the gravel with a bark so sharp it shattered the stillness. The man froze, dropped the dolly. The other figure in the cab yelled and reached under the seat. Langston was already moving. Bear lunged, knocking the man off his feet. Langston reached the driver a second later, dragging him from the cab, pressing him to the ground with one knee as sirens approached from down the block. Officers flooded the yard within minutes. The crates were seized. Inside, not explosives this time, but communications gear, signal jammers, encrypted radios. Reyes arrived on scene and surveyed the truck's contents, the fake credentials, and the two silent suspects. They were not petty criminals. They were methodical, funded, trained. And Bear had tracked them from a single drop of blood in a dark alley. At the hospital, Marcus stirred for the first time since surgery. The room was quiet, save for the low beep of monitors and the hum of the IV. A nurse entered and adjusted the oxygen line. Marcus opened his eyes slowly. The first thing he did was look toward the door. He tried to speak. His voice was weak, strained. But the message was clear. The dog. Where is he? The nurse smiled faintly and placed a hand on his shoulder. He never left the scene. Later that evening, Bear was led into Marcus's hospital room. The moment the dog entered, Marcus's expression softened. Pain still clear in his face, but something else too. Gratitude, familiarity, unspoken understanding. Bear moved quietly to the bed and placed his head beside Marcus's hand. The officers in the room said nothing. They didn't need to. They all knew what had been uncovered in the span of one day. A criminal operation that stretched beneath the city, threats that wore the faces of workers and officers, plans drawn up to infiltrate and cripple infrastructure from the inside. All of it unraveled because of Bear. But the trail wasn't finished. There were names on the IDs that didn't match the suspects in custody. The tablet recovered in the truck had partially erased logs, but enough metadata to point to one final location, a ferry terminal under renovation on the edge of the industrial district. A delivery was scheduled for the following evening. The officers began preparing immediately, and Bear, once again, would lead the charge. Night had fallen again. A thin fog had settled along the harbor, turning the dockside lights into soft orbs in the mist. The old ferry terminal, half renovated and barely operational, stood like a shadow at the edge of the city's industrial limits, a forgotten structure surrounded by chain-link fencing, stacks of rusted containers, and concrete barriers. Construction signs fluttered in the wind. Beneath it all, something stirred. Bear stood beside Officer Langston outside the perimeter, eyes fixed on the terminal's outline beyond the gate. A soft growl buzzed low in his throat. He had been tracking the same scent for nearly an hour, faint but unmistakable. The same synthetic blend of metal, oil, and something else from the crates they had found earlier. They had uncovered part of the operation already. Fake IDs, uniforms, gear. But one site remained unchecked. The terminal, and the delivery scheduled for tonight. Captain Reyes had ordered full containment. Plainclothes officers circled the perimeter. Tactical units staged 2 blocks away. A bomb unit prepped in silence. The plan was clear. Sweep the area before anyone could activate or move whatever had been planted. But they had no idea where to begin. Bear did. The interior of the terminal was a maze of steel and glass, with scaffolding still wrapped around the upper levels. Broken tiles littered the lobby. Unfinished electrical wiring hung in coils from the ceiling. Rain from earlier had pooled in shallow puddles across the concrete floor. Bear led them inside. Langston followed with flashlight drawn, sweeping each section in rhythm with Bear's movement. Officers flanked both sides, silent, weapons at the ready. The place felt hollow, like a place the city had forgotten. But Bear moved with certainty, nose down, every footstep controlled. They passed through the main terminal doors, deeper into the structure, then paused at a set of maintenance stairs. Bear barked once, short, clipped, precise. Langston motioned the team to a halt. They listened. Faint noise. The kind of noise people made when they thought they were alone. A scrape of metal. A muffled impact. Then a click. Bear turned his head toward the eastern stairwell and moved quickly. The corridor opened into a lower service bay where an old generator room sat untouched since the start of renovations. Bear sniffed the door frame and backed away, twice. Langston stepped forward, lifted a hand. This door was rigged. Bomb squad moved in. The sweep confirmed it. Pressure triggers had been wired to the frame, attached to an improvised package stashed inside a nearby electrical cabinet. Had Bear led them directly through the doorway, the device would have detonated. The squad worked quickly, disarming with steady hands, their breath shallow, tools tapping gently against the wires. Within minutes, the device was safe. But there was more. Bear circled the room again. He barked sharply, then bolted into the hallway. Officers gave chase as he led them back toward the eastern end of the building, toward the old ferry loading bays. The wind had picked up outside, howling through the metal beams. Inside, Bear stopped near an open hatch in the floor, part of an old cargo ramp leading beneath the platform. He barked again. Langston dropped to one knee and shined his light down the narrow shaft. There, just visible in the shadows, was a row of sealed crates, identical to those from the truck and tunnel. This was it, the epicenter. For over 2 hours, officers worked in silence to secure the area. Crates were extracted, documented, disarmed. Each one held more equipment, explosive components, encrypted radios, building maps, and access credentials for infrastructure far beyond the city. Water treatment plants, transit hubs, energy substations. The suspects were not targeting a single event. They were building a network, and it had taken one police dog, bleeding and exhausted, to uncover it. But it was not over yet. As the last crate was being pulled out, Bear's ears perked. He turned sharply toward the bay doors, low to the ground, tail stiff, eyes locked. Langston saw it too, a flicker of movement beyond the glass. A man stepped through the side gate. He was calm, walking with the confidence of someone who belonged there. He wore a contractor's vest, pushed a dolly in front of him, and moved straight toward the back of the terminal. 2 more figures trailed behind, casually scanning the perimeter. They were not expecting resistance. Bear let out a single growl, deep, guttural, and low. Langston gave the signal. The team moved. Spotlights flared. Shouts cut the air. The men scattered. Bear surged forward, weaving between beams and barriers like a ghost. One suspect veered left, but Bear closed the distance in seconds, launching forward in a powerful arc. The man went down hard, his scream cut short by Bear's bark at his throat. Officers descended moments later. The other 2 ran toward the scaffolded exit. Langston and his team followed. Sirens echoed in the distance. More units arrived. Within minutes, both men were in custody. The dolly they pushed carried nothing, but in their jackets were schematics for 3 more sites, including out-of-state locations. This was not just about one city. It was part of something wider. Reyes surveyed the scene. "We just intercepted a moving operation." Langston nodded and looked down at Bear, now seated beside the first suspect. His breath heavy, fur damp, but posture calm. He found all of it, from an alley, from one trail. The following morning brought silence. Marcus awoke in his hospital bed to the sound of soft paws on the tile. Bear stood at the doorway, tail swaying faintly, eyes locked on his partner. A nurse stepped aside and let the dog in. Marcus reached out weakly. Bear moved to the edge of the bed and leaned into his hand. No words were spoken. They were not needed. Later that day, Bear was brought into the precinct briefing room where officers stood in quiet formation. The whiteboard showed every link of the operation they had stopped. Maps, blueprints, timelines, dozens of intersecting threads, all traced back to a single night, a single alley, a single canine. Captain Reyes stood before the team and placed a photo on the wall. Bear standing over the crate of thermite, eyes glowing in the flashlight's beam. This city was weeks from a coordinated strike. We would have missed it, but Bear did not. She turned to the dog. You stopped a war before it started. No applause, no ceremony, just a quiet moment of understanding. As the sun set over the city that evening, Bear sat in the grass outside the hospital, watching traffic pass, ears twitching at each shift in the wind. Behind him, Marcus lay resting, healing slowly but alive. They would both return, eventually. But for now, Bear remained where he was, silent, alert, unshaken. A silent guardian, the partner who had refused to leave a wounded officer in an alley, and who uncovered something no one had expected.